Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our pre-Pesach Pearls, Part 2. The last day of Pesach is inextricably linked to the first day of Pesach. By definition, there are only two complete redemptions that Judaism fundamentally talks about and incorporates into its basic belief system. The first is, as Maimonides highlights, the complete redemption that took place at Egypt, where all the Jewish people who had previously been enslaved now merited to their redemption. And the second, as is part of Maimonides' 13 principles of faith and fundamental to Jewish belief, is with the coming of Mashiach, as per what we say in our Amidah 3 times a day, all Jews, yet again, will be gathered from all the corners of the world. And hence, our sages instituted that inasmuch as day one is dedicated to that first redemption when we were born into nationhood, day 8 of Pesach is dedicated to the broader theme of Mashiach, of our ultimate redemption. And hence the Haftarah that is read on the 8th day of Pesach begins with the words Od Hayom Benov, the words Sali Varoni Hashem, and all themes that are linked with the ultimate redemption, when we will see an end, as the Maimonides describes, to all pain and all suffering. With that in mind, let's consider an unusual detail of the Haggadah. There is one particular story amongst several that we may well all be familiar with, and that is when all the rabbis get together and they join Rabbi Akiva in Bnei Brak in Israel, where they sit and they discuss the Exodus all night long. Until, as we read, their students come along to them and say to them, hey, rabbis, it's time to say the morning Shema. So the story is recorded in the first instance just to really emphasize to us the significance and the importance of recalling the Exodus story. And look, even these great rabbis, doesn't matter how intelligent they were, how smart they were, etc., they went all night long talking about the Exodus story. Question: why did they all go to Bnei Brak? What's wrong with Jerusalem? Some of the rabbis there were Rabbi Eliezer. Another one was Rabbi Yehoshua. These two rabbis were in actual fact the teachers of Rabbi Akiva. So why is it the case that inasmuch as they were teachers of Rabbi Akiva, they went down to him rather than the Seder being conducted in their own locality? Why is it in specific that they go to Bnei Brak? Now, you might think to yourself, well, why not? What difference does it make? Wherever they go, you're going to say, why didn't they go somewhere else? In fact, the Talmud makes the observation that Rabbi Akiva, as is the case with anyone, when you're sitting in the presence of your esteemed rabbi, even though there's a mitzvah to lean on Seder night, you do not lean if it's in the presence of your teachers, because that would be deemed as disrespectful. It's not the sort of thing that would be done. Nevertheless, Rabbi Akiva was allowed to go ahead and lean, even as he was in the presence of his two teachers, amongst others, precisely because he was the head rabbi of the city of Bnei Brak. But again, it begs clarity. So they were his teachers. Why are they coming to him? Why isn't he going to them? Why do these great rabbis that we list in the Haggadah choose to all go down to Bnei Brak instead of them going to Jerusalem or wherever else besides? So for that, we need to consider the time frame. This was going on during the tyranny of Hadrian, a vicious anti-Semite. He persecuted the Jewish people in a way like no other. He crushed the Bar Kokhba revolt. He flattened the Temple Mount. He was responsible single-handedly for the murder of some of the famous 10 martyrs that we reference on Yom Kippur and on the 9th of Av. He forbade all Torah learning and the performance of any Jewish ritual for fear of death. It wasn't just the people killed or the temple destroyed. He was committed to uprooting every last vestige of Jewish life and living. One can only imagine the overwhelming sense of bleakness and despair. No seeming light of any sort on the horizon. Let me ask you something. How do you celebrate Pesach in the middle of all of that? Do you envisage sitting down not just sitting down, but reclining, feeling luxury and liberty in the midst of that utter doom and gloom setting. It's Pesach in the world, but who could celebrate redemption? Who could tune into a consciousness of redemption to celebrate the exodus of the past and anticipate a redemption of the future during such dark, horrific times? And as much as we can ask the question about them, we can ask the question about our brothers and sisters and indeed the rest of us in Israel now as well. Yes, you can go through the motions, but who could really mean what they say? We say in the Haggadah, in every generation, we have to see ourselves as though we are experiencing redemption. Really? How do you inculcate that into your mindset when you are in a very dark setting? Who could say with any sense of conviction, next year in Jerusalem, when they just saw Jerusalem decimated? And these rabbis, Rabbi Yehoshua, Rabbi Tafron, Rabbi Eliezer, etc., they have a responsibility to inspire their own flock, their own students, their own followers, to set the example for everybody else. How do you do that? How do you, as you would have to, first inspire yourself in order to then pass on that inspiration to others? So it comes along some of the classic commentaries and tell us they all decided, you know what? This Pesach, we're going to Bnei Brak. We're going to spend Seder night with Rabbi Akiva. Why? Because there's a well-known story told about Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva, the Talmud tells us, was once traveling along with some of these same colleagues. It was Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah and Rabbi Gamliel, and they saw from a mountaintop a fox on the very spot of where the Holy of Holies once stood. And as the Talmud relates, they all burst into tears. But Rabbi Akiva was laughing. They said to him, "Why are you laughing?" And he said, "Well, why are you crying?" They explained the very place where we are told this was the Holy of Holies, even a strange man other than a high priest on Yom Kippur ever treads over there, it's punishable by that. Nobody's ever allowed to tread there. So holy is that spot. And now even a fox is walking there, roaming this holiest of places. Said Rabbi Akiva, that is why I'm laughing. Because there were two prophecies that were foretold. One of them was by the great prophet Uriah, and the other was by the great prophet Zechariah. Uriah was all about, his prophecy was all about the fact that Zion is going to be plowed like a field, uprooted like a field. Zechariah had a prophecy where the elders and of all the Jewish people will yet again return to the streets of Jerusalem and watch rebuilding once more. And even though these two prophets lived at distinctly different times, one foretelling about the destruction that was to happen, the other foretelling about the rebuilding that would eventually happen as well, we find elsewhere that God himself links the two prophets and makes reference to both prophets, even as they lived at different times. Said Rabbi Akiva, why is God referencing both these prophets? One talking about destruction, the other talking about rebuilding, when they lived in different eras, if not for the fact, said Rabbi Akiva, that the two prophecies are inextricably linked. When Uriah prophesied, he said, Zion will be plowed like a field and oxen will tread over the holy temple. When Zechariah, who came a whole generation later, prophesied, he said, yet again, there will be rebuilding and restoring of the Jewish people and the land of Israel and the holy temple in Jerusalem. And inasmuch as God links these two prophets together, he said, until such point as I did not see the first prophecy fulfilled, I didn't necessarily know that the second one will be fulfilled. Now that I saw the first prophecy fulfilled, that Zion was being plowed like a field and oxen are treading over there, and I see that literally, I know that the second prophecy will yet be fulfilled as well. That there will be the restoration of Israel, of Jerusalem, of the Jewish people. Dignity will be restored. Jewish life will be vibrant once more. The temple will yet stand again. Concludes the Talmud. In these words, the other rabbis responded to him. Akiva, nichamtanu, nichamtanu. Akiva, you have comforted us, you have comforted us. These other rabbis, of course they believed in redemption. Of course they believed in the restoration of Israel. Of course they believed in Mashiach. Of course they believed in what Maimonides lists as one of the basic principles of faith. In fact, in the very words of the Torah itself, God says, I will yet again return you to your homeland. So of course they believed it. But right now, as much as you can believe something, they're caught up in the intensity of the grief and the pain. They can't see it in the moment. They can't right now laugh about the future. They can only cry about the very real and present pain. Now, to be sure, Rabbi Akiva, on the other hand, of course, he's not in denial. But he could look at pain and he could see it as a catalyst for transformation. In fact, why did Rabbi Akiva select this prophecy of destruction when there are many other unfortunate prophecies about pending destructions, even from Zechariah himself, Jeremiah, and so on and so forth? And the answer is because the language of that prophecy is Zion will be plowed like a field and oxen will tread there. When a field is plowed, at first glance, it looks like destruction. The landscape is ruined, but that's how the field is ready for a new planting and new growth. Do you know in Hebrew, there is a word, mashber, which comes from the root word shavira, which means breaking, breakdown. But the same word is used in the Torah as a birthing stool. What's the connection? In Judaism, every disintegration is painful. It's difficult. It's Tisha B'Av, not Simchas Torah. Rabbi Akiva's unique ability and vision was that he was able to look at the plowing and see the sowing, the planting, the growth, and indeed, even within the breakage, the rebirth. Kabbalah actually observes that the name Akiva has the same letters as the name Yaakov. And they both married a woman called Rachel. And when it comes to Jacob, our forefather Jacob, Yaakov, it says, Vayar ki shever b'Yisrael. He was despondent, he was mourning, he was grieving over the loss of his son Yosef, but he never ever gave up hope. He saw that there was, the word is shever, which means broken, but in that context, food, sustenance. In the middle of the pain and the hunger, he knew there was still some life there in Egypt. He had a sense that as much as he was grieving over the alleged loss of his son Joseph, there's still hope on the horizon. That was Yaakov, and many generations later, someone who's parallel with him, Rabbi Akiva. Moreover, the Mishnah records an argument. How do we finish the recitation of the main part of the Haggadah? Rabbi Tarfon, one of the rabbis who came to Rabbi Akiva, says you pick up the second cup and you say, thank you, God, who redeemed us and redeemed our forefathers back then in Egypt. That's the end of the blessing. Comes along Rabbi Akiva and says, no. The blessing is he who redeemed us and redeemed our forefathers, so too will he once again redeem us and bring us to greater celebration in the future and greater festivities in the future. And we will yet again give thanks to you and sing new songs to you for our own redemption and for the salvation of our own souls. What's the difference between the two? Rabbi Tarfon says, you look at the past, you reflect on the reality of what happened then, and that's what you're giving thanks for. Rabbi Akiva says, no, you also look at the future. Even in the midst of your current state of being plowed, you see already a field of new blossoms. And of course, Jewish law follows Rabbi Akiva. As we know, that's how we finish the blessing. He himself was an example, a living example of somebody who embodied that reality. Rabbi Akiva himself, he was like a dry field. There was no growth in him, no spiritual growth, no knowledge. He had seemingly limited spiritual capacity. But at the age of 40, even as he knew less than a kid at a Milchel Cheder, at the encouragement of his wife, he goes on to study and eventually reaches 24,000 students. And himself is able to interpret certain aspects of the Torah that even himself, Moses himself, wasn't able to translate. Again, no despondency, no despair. He doesn't give up. He grows, he plants, he sows anew. What happened to those 24,000 students that he acquired and accumulated? Well, in the middle of Pesach, we go straight into the Omer period, during which they all died out. It's a semi-mourning period of time on the Jewish calendar. How would any normal person react? What would become of us? Tells us the Talmud, what did Rabbi Akiva do? He went to the south and he found 5 people. Imagine, he used to lecture to 24,000 people, now all gone. And now he's sitting with 5 new students. What would that do to most of us? We wouldn't necessarily ever really recover. Says the Talmud, the world was literally desolate. But these 5 students, who were they? They were Rabbi Meir, one of the authors of the Mishnah. There was Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, the first real person who expounded on Kabbalah and made it accessible to us. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yehuda ben Eloi, and through them, he recreated the tradition of Torah to the point where, as the Talmud says, the whole of oral law we have today on account of Rabbi Akiva and those 5 students who kept it alive. How did he do it? Because he had that conviction. In fact, we're told that if you ever look at a Torah scroll, you'll find on the top of certain letters, there are little crowns, little dots. They actually are referred to as cuts, which literally translates as like a little dot on top of some of the letters. And Rabbi Akiva's uniqueness was that he was able to interpret. God tells Moses, however much you know, Akiva will come along one day and he will be able to interpret every little cuts. He'll be able to understand and analyze even the little dots on some of the letters in the Torah scroll. The word cuts can also mean a thorn. And therefore, allegorically, what we're being told over here is even with every thorn, even with every bit of pain endured, he was able to transform it into something spiritual, something uplifting, something holy. You know, in 1917, Sarah Schneer founded the Beis Yaakov movement. Beis Yaakov, of course, is a huge movement of girls' schools all across Israel, the United States, here in the UK, etc. She foresaw at the time the risk and the minimal education that Jewish girls were getting and how that lent itself to so much risk if they would start wandering in foreign pastures. So she opened up Jewish schools that would provide sound Jewish education, but equally secular education. 1917, she founded the very first Beis Yaakov girls' school in Krakow. And it began with 10 girls. From then till present, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of girls who have gone through that system. When she began that school, people started to throw rocks, as was typical of the anti-Semitism. One big rock landed, crashed through a glass, and the girls were terrified. And do you know what she did? She picked it up and she said, good, now we have the foundation stone for the next school. That was Rabbi Akiva. In fact, we are told that even on his deathbed, as he's being gruesomely tortured, as I said, one of the 10 martyrs, he's smiling to the point where the executioner is shocked and his own students couldn't fathom. And they said, what's going on? And he said, all of my life I said the Shema. And in the Shema, I said, you shall love God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. All your soul, by definition, means that you have to love God, even if it means giving up your soul for the sake of God. Never before did I know I'd necessarily be able to do it. Now I know that as much as I paid lip service to it, I am willing and am able to give up my life for the sake of God. And then he finished saying the last words of the Shema, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, and his soul left. What does the very verse Shema mean? As we're told in the Chumash itself. Right now it's Hashem Elokeinu, God is our God. But when Mashiach comes, it'll be Hashem Echad. God will be one. By definition, the whole world will recognize the truth of the one God. And thus there'll be such peace, harmony, and unity throughout the world. So coming back to our point, Rabbi Akiva sitting in Bnei Brak at the pinnacle of Roman barbarism and destruction, physical, spiritual, and he's keeping his faith in the future. And that's the real story behind the story in the Haggadah. Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yeshua, and Rabbi Tarfon, etc. You want to go to a Seder? Where do you go to a Seder? Go to the chief rabbi of Bnei Brak. Go to Rabbi Akiva. And you will then learn how to have hope and indeed laugh in anticipation of the future. You know, there was a young Chabad rabbi who walked into a mayor's office in Alaska. And he said, I am here to bring the spice and spirit of Judaism to the Jews of Alaska. This is before Chabad permanently settled there as one of the places. And I heard the story firsthand from the guy. The mayor says it's very fine, but there are no Jews in this particular town. No synagogue, nothing. So, okay, I traveled all this distance. Can I at least speak one of the local schools? The arrangements are made, and that same afternoon, the young rabbi is speaking to a group of non-Jewish primary school kids about Judaism and about the Noahide laws, etc. And then he says, "Who amongst you has ever seen a Jew?" And after a small moment of silence, a little hand is raised, and a little blonde girl says, "I have. My mom." So after the school day, he makes arrangements to meet with the girl and her mom. What's he supposed to say? What kind of a message can you impart to such deeply assimilated souls? Go to synagogue? There isn't one. Join some Jewish social club? They're the only ones in town. Leave? That's not going to go down well. He left her with a sterling thought that is as penetrating as it is simple. For Jews, he said, there's a special day every week, and it's called the Shabbat. Jewish mothers and daughters throughout the world have a custom where they light a Shabbos candle just before the onset of this magical day. A candle which symbolizes illumination and warmth and peace. And then he added something compelling and moving. When Mashiach comes, the whole world will be illuminated with the glow of the Shabbat candles. The two furthest stretches of the world are roughly from New Zealand to Alaska, separated by about 22 and a half hours. He says to this young fair-haired girl, imagine so many thousands upon thousands of people across the globe lighting that candle every single week. It's a chain reaction, which begins at sunset in New Zealand and ends with sunset right here in Alaska. Be sure to light your candle always, he said to her. You're the last link on the chain. The rest of the world is waiting for you. Imagine what the world would be like if we all paused long enough to think ourselves as the last link on the chain, to dare consider that the rest of the world is waiting for you. That's the challenge, to realize that no act is committed in isolation. Something that you might not give a whole lot of consideration to, a simple word, a small gesture, but it resonates. It has compelling effects. It reverberates well beyond your immediate confines and echoes through the course of history. Thus, says Maimonides, we all have to see the whole world as though evenly balanced on a scale where one good deed of my own could make all the difference in tipping the scales for the merit of the world collectively and bring redemption to civilization. Thus, our rabbis tell us, man was created alone because he's obligated to say, for me was this world created. Every one of us has to believe the world was created for me, and if the world was created for me, then the rest of the world is waiting for me to make the necessary differences that will positively affect all mankind. Another story happened a few weeks before Pesach, 1976 in Holland. George lived in a small village in the Dutch countryside. Not a particularly religious Jew, but he kept the few commandments that he had learned from his parents. But they had been killed, sadly, much of his family wiped out by the Nazis. Now he's alone, literally in that town, as far as he knows, the only Jew. He didn't complain, kept to himself, had a good job as a cook in a restaurant, fixed up the old house the Germans had destroyed, was quite content. His problem was he was very alone, he was very shy, he always had trouble finding friends or making any major moves in life. And coupled with being a Jew, it was taking its toll. It didn't matter to him at first being the only Jew in the area that he knew about. He enjoyed the privacy and doing his own thing on his own, but the weekends were becoming unbearable because on Saturdays, he chose to say a few prayers that he knew at home. But on Sunday, he's watching everybody else coming, going to church, etc., and he has nowhere to go. He's missing out on all that social. And then, frankly, as far as he's concerned, I still want to try and find a Jewish girl to marry, a Jewish lady, but there are no Jews for miles. Many times he thought about selling his house, leaving his job, moving to a bigger city, bigger Jewish community. But for him, again, a jump, a major move, he's afraid. He needed someone else to help him. There's nobody. Kept putting it off year after year until he's already now moved on and he's decided, you know what? I'm just going to give up. I'm going to go to the local priests and I'll join the rest of the pack. If you can't beat him, join him. It's the easiest, simplest solution. I'll be welcomed. I'll have a social group. I'll have a wonderful life. Not that he hadn't considered that before. He had many times, but something inside him always told him he's wrong. He'd heard stories about how Jews gave up their lives not to do it. And he's sure that his father and his grandfather, if they were alive, would be horrified. But he's tired of being alone and enduring the inner struggle. And finally, he made up his mind. He's had enough. Pesach is approaching, the holiday when God helped the Jews of miracles thousands of years ago. So unless God helps me now, I'm out. In fact, he says maybe the whole thing is just a monumental Baba Maisa. He prayed to God. He said, listen, God, if you care about me, then I need a miracle like you did in Egypt. Send somebody to help me. But if it doesn't happen in the next couple of weeks, then frankly, I'm not sure that you exist, or even if you do, I've got the wrong end of the stick. I'm going to the priest. 2 weeks passed, nothing happened. He says, that's it. He's cooking up orders in the restaurant. 2 weeks is up. When I finish work today, I'm going to the priest. And then his boss breaks his thoughts. Someone here for you, George. He looks up. He can't, what are you talking about? There's a guy here. Who, what? And all of a sudden, a fully fledged Jew, hat, beard, dark suit and all. You're Jewish? George wipes his hands on his aprons. He nods yes with tears in his eyes. He says, good to see you. I've been wandering around this town for about 4 or 5 hours looking for you. George says, you're looking for me? Why do you want me? Who are you? He said, I'm a chassid. I'm a follower of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Schneerson in Brooklyn. I live in Amsterdam, and I got a call a few days ago from the Rebbe's office that he wants me to come here to this town and find the Jew that lives here and give this box of matzah to him. And he handed George a nicely colored box of matzah. 3 matzahs for the Pesach Seder tomorrow night. George took the box as though he was in a dream, and he blurted out, you don't understand. This is a miracle. God answered my prayers. And he proceeded to tell him his entire story. He remained with those 3 matzahs on his own on Seder night, but eventually he made his move as well. You know, when the prophets promise us that at the end of the days, no Jew will be left behind, they're telling us categorically, one way or the other, every member of the Jewish people will find their way home. Only God is looking to you and to me to help him in that task, to hasten the process. That's the meaning of the words that we say in the Haggadah when we say Lashana Haba B'Yerushalayim next year in Jerusalem. And I'll actually finish with one last story. The Bolshevik Rebbe, Rabbi Yisrael Spiro, went through stuff in the Holocaust that was absolutely mind-boggling. His wife was killed, his only daughter being killed, his entire family, hundreds of his Hasidim. There are many stories written about him by Yafa Elias in her book, Hasidic Tales of the Holocaust. After the war, it took a lot of courage for survivors to remarry. But when he was liberated from Bergen-Belsen, somebody suggested a match to him, a widow who had survived amazingly enough with her 4 children. Her name was Branya, and they married. Years later, somebody asked him, how did you know, despite everything you went through, that you wanted to marry this particular Rebbetzin, Branya? And he shared the following extraordinary story. He said, when I was in Bergen-Belsen, I went to the camp officials and I requested permission to bake matzah. Unexpectedly, they responded, okay, but whoever wants to make the matzahs with you has to write their name down and we'll submit the request to Berlin. Could you imagine? Needless to say, most Jews did not put their names down. They knew they were being set up and signing their death warrant. But the Bolshevik Rebbe said, look, we don't have anything to lose. We're going to die anyway. So he and only 4 other men wrote their names down on the request to make matzah. And they submitted it. And as soon as the others wrote down their names, they regretted it. They feared, here we go. Oh, my goodness. You know, it's like calling out to the Nazis. Hey there, this is me. Come, kill me. A few weeks later, the camp officials returned and announced, okay, who are the 5 people who said they want to make matzah? Come with us. And these 5 followed, saying goodbye to their friends, believing this was their last moments on earth. But instead of killing them, camp officials informed them that their request had been approved. So then the question was, who's going to get to eat from the matzahs? There's only a few small matzahs and tens of thousands of Jews in Bergen-Belsen. And then a mother of 4 children stepped forward and she said, could you please break off small pieces of matzah for my children? And others are arguing, but your children are small. They're not even bar mitzvah, bat mitzvah yet. They're not obligated to eat the matzah. But she said, my children are the next generation. They have to know what matzah is. They are the future of the Jewish people. So the Rebbe gave them the matzah. Why did he decide to marry that mother of those 4 children after the war? He explained, nobody in Bergen-Belsen thought about the next minute. You didn't think about the next day, the next week. Survival was second to second. Here is a woman who's thinking she's going to survive and that there's going to be a next generation. And I knew that if this woman had that kind of courage, if she was so connected with the story of Pesach, that she believed we would experience our own personal exodus from Bergen-Belsen, that was the woman that I wanted to marry. By the way, they lived to the ripe age of 99 and 94. They didn't have any more children after the war, but her 4 children were raised as his own. And today, each one of them leads their own congregations. quite compellingly, those 4 children who ate matzah in Bergen-Belsen and the merit of their mother's astonishing determination of faith. And it's no mere irony that we address 4 children at the Seder as well. And we're addressing them not just in the here and now, but we're addressing them to fortify them for the future as well. So we need to endeavor to adopt some of that same determination of Branya, of Rabbi Akiva. We have to have faith in our lives and believe in the future. And when we do, then we say, Lashana Haba Yerushalayim, next year in Jerusalem, we will indeed merit that in every real and absolute sense. And so shall it be. And with that, I wish you all a truly happy, healthy, joyous, and kosher Pesach. Shabbat Shalom.